In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, we're going to be taking a look at multi-classing the Warlock, comparing it to all the other classes as a Warlock, and seeing what combinations would work very well, including breakpoints, what you gain and lose at each level down to level 6 of Warlock. This is obviously primarily if you're playing a Warlock. In other videos for other classes we'll go through if you just dabbled in a couple levels of Warlock with that particular class. And Warlock, like Paladin, is one of those classes that's just phenomenal at multi-classing, and the reason for that is because you gain their spell slots back on short rest, allowing them to, give a lot of utility to certain classes, but also because at level 5 of Warlock, if you went Pact of the Blade at level 3, you'll gain an extra attack with your Pact weapon that does stack with the extra attacks of other martial classes that have extra attacks, allowing you to get 3 attacks per turn, which is huge. And Barbarian Warlock is not a bad pairing in my opinion. There's a lot of things Warlocks can benefit from, but there is an issue, which is that while Barbarians are raging, they cannot maintain concentration on spells and they cannot cast spells. So if you're a Warlock, they have a lot of concentration spells, and obviously they're going to want to use their spells in combat. So you might have to, cast some spells that don't require concentration and then rage. You can do this like on the first turn of combat even. You could throw like a fireball or instance, something like that, and then use your rage as a bonus action after that. So it's not necessarily the end of the world, but it is a little bit trickier to manage than maybe some other classes would be combined with Warlock. So probably the highest I would go would be 10 Warlock and 2 Barbarian, and that's because I don't really see any reason to go 1 level of Barbarian to pick up maybe some proficiencies in Rage, since you could just pick up like 1 level of Fighter and get a fighting style and not have to worry about, using Rage and still get those proficiencies. So I don't think I would go 11 Warlock, 1 Barbarian. I think I would minimally go, or highest I would go is 10 Warlock, 2 Barbarian. And at 10 Warlock, 2 Barbarian, you're essentially gaining Reckless Attack and Rage. So if you're not playing a melee Warlock, if you're not going Pact of the Blade, then Barbarian isn't really going to give you much, because these things really apply to melee combat. In exchange for that, from going down from 12 Warlock down to 10 Warlock, you're going to lose a feat. You're going to lose Mystic Arcanum, which is essentially a level 6 spell. And you're going to lose an additional spell slot, which you would have gained at level 11, and you will lose an Eldritch Invocation. That's a lot to lose, in my opinion, for Reckless Attack and Rage. That level 6 spell can be quite powerful. The additional spell slot every short rest is huge. And obviously getting your final Eldritch Invocation can be really big. So this is a tough one in my opinion, and I don't know that I would necessarily recommend going 10 Warlock, 2 Barbarian if you want to match these two classes. Now at 9 Warlock, 3 Barbarian, you're going to gain a subclass for Barbarian, which can be quite strong. Wild Heart, Wild Magic, Berserker all have really good things at this level, so they're not bad pickups. And you lose a Warlock subclass feature, their level 10 subclass feature, in order to gain that. In my opinion, it depends on what Warlock subclass you are. Like, getting a damage resistance from the Fiend is at level 10, whichever one you want every short rest, is pretty good, in my opinion. However, I don't know if it's necessary. Like, it depends on what damage type you want to take. If you're playing the Archfey or the Great Old One, I don't think these benefits are quite as good. So, it really depends on, what Warlock subclass you chose, whether this is good or not, but I think generally it's better than 10 and 2. And then if you drop down to 8 Warlock and 4 Barbarian, you're gaining a feat, but you're sacrificing level 5 spells and a level 5 spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation in order to pick up that feat. I don't think that's worth it for a Warlock, in my opinion. Being able to fling level 5 spells every short rest, or 2 of them, is extremely strong, and being able to get another Eldritch Invocation is really good. I don't know if a feat is stronger than that, in my opinion. I think generally it wouldn't be. And then if you're going 7 Warlock, 5 Barbarian, you're gaining an extra attack from Barbarian, and you're losing that feat that you would have gained at 8 and 4. I think this is probably a much better spot than 8 and 4. If you're going to lose those 5 spell slots and level 5 spells, you might as well pick up an extra attack. You know what I mean? Extra attack's much stronger than a feat. That stacks with the Warlock's extra attack from Pact of the Blade. So you could attack 3 turns with this. You would have Reckless Attack. You'd be able to Rage while doing it. This is a really, really strong spot, in my opinion. So if you're going to go Warlock Barbarian, I think I would minimally go 7 Warlock, 5 Barbarian. And then if you go 6 Warlock, 6 Barbarian, you're gaining another Barbarian subclass feature, but you're losing level 4 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation. I don't think that's a good trade-off, in my opinion. Most of the time, that's not going to be worth it. I don't recommend going 6 and 6. And lastly, something I would just mention here is that if you're going to go all the way 7 Warlock, 5 Barbarian, you should consider potentially going 5 Warlock, 5 Barbarian, 2 Fighter, because you're basically losing level 4 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation, but what you're gaining is a fighting style from Fighter and your Second Wind, and you're also gaining Action Surge, which would allow you to take those 3 attacks you're going to gain every round and then do them all again. So that would give you 6 attacks in one turn with Reckless Attack and Rage at the same time. You could cast something with your spell slots that doesn't require, concentration, like Armor of Agathis on yourself, for instance, or something like that. And then, you would even deal more damage if enemies hit you in combat. So that's not a bad pairing either, in my opinion. And frankly, if you're mixing Warlock, 5 levels of Warlock with 5 levels of another martial class like Monk, Fighter, Ranger, anything that gets an extra attack, Paladin, then you might want to consider going 5-5 and 2 Fighter for the exact same reason. And next we take a look at Bard, Warlock, Multiclassing. And this is another phenomenal one because Bards and Warlocks both use Charisma for their spells, for the spell difficulty class of their spells. So, if you pump Charisma up, then both Warlock and Bard spells will be effective, even though they use different types of spell slots. And because if you take Pact of the Blade, your Charisma modifier is used in order to calculate your attack rolls and damage rolls, you can just kind of hobby horse Charisma in order to have a very powerful melee character and spellcaster. So probably the highest in Warlock I would go here is also 10 Warlock, 2 Bard. I don't really see the purpose in going 11 Warlock, 1 Bard. I don't think you would gain enough from Bard to really justify that. Well, essentially what you're gaining here by doing this is you're gaining Bard spell slots and level 1 Bard spells. You're gaining Bardic Inspiration, Song of Rest, and Jack of All Trades. And what you're losing is a feat from level 12 of Warlock. You're losing a level 6 spell. You're losing an additional spell slot from level 11 Warlock, and you're losing an Eldritch Invocation. This is a rough trade in my opinion. I don't think you're getting enough from Bard here to justify losing this stuff from Warlock. So even though you could go this high, I don't think I would necessarily go 10 Warlock, 2 Bard. And then if you go down to 9 Warlock, 3 Bard, you're essentially gaining a Bard subclass, which is great. Bards are very front-loaded on their subclasses, so there's a lot to love here. You're going to gain expertise in 2 skills, and you will also gain access to Bard level 2 spells and Bard level 2 spell slots. In exchange for that, you're losing a Warlock subclass feature, which really depends on which subclass you are, how strong that is, and you're losing a Warlock cantrip. So I think this is a better spot than 10 and 2. If you're going to go this much Warlock, I think 9 and 3 is much better than 10 and 2. And then if you go down to 8 Warlock, 4 Bard, you're gaining a feat, but you're losing level 5 spells and spell slots with your Warlock spell slots, and you're losing an Eldritch Invocation. I don't think this is a good trade-off in my opinion. Level 5 spells, quite strong. Being able to use all of your spells upcast to level 5, I think is probably better than a feat. And then at 7 Warlock, 5 Bard, you lose that feat you just gained, but you gain Font of Inspiration, allowing you to use Bardic Inspiration on short rest, or replenish them on short rest as well as long rest. You have an improved Bardic Inspiration die. You gain Bard level 3 spells and spell slots. So I think this is much better than 8 and 4. In my opinion, 9 and 3, 7 and 5 are both improvements over 8 and 4. I would not recommend going 8 and 4. And then finally, if you go 6 Warlock, 6 Bard, you lose access to your level 4 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation on Warlock, but in exchange for that, you gain a Bard subclass feature, which could be extra attack from 2 of the Bard subclasses or extra magical secrets, and you gain Counter Charm. This is really, really strong in my opinion. Getting that extra attack again that you can then stack with the Warlock's extra attack to get 3 attacks every turn, still have level 3 Bard spells and spell slots, still have level 3 Warlock spells and spell slots. Quite strong. Even if you went College of Lore and got, magical secrets, it would allow you to pick some spells you wouldn't normally be able to use, which is also quite strong. So this is very good in my opinion. I think probably if you're going 7 and 5, 7 Warlock, 5 Bard, you probably ought to go all the way down to 6 Warlock, 6 Bard, because I think it's just, frankly, stronger. And even though I don't typically go below 6 Warlock, 6 Bard, I would say that if you're going all the way down to 6 Warlock, 6 Bard, you're probably better off going down 5 Warlock, 7 Bard. And that's because you would just lose a subclass feature here, which, really depends on what Warlock subclass you are, to pick up level 4 spells and spell slots from Bard, which I think is probably a good trade. So next we come to Cleric, Warlock Multiclassing, and this is a tough one in my opinion because Clerics use Wisdom for their spell casting, and Warlocks use Charisma, which means in order to cast both types of spells effectively, you would have to have high Wisdom and high Charisma. Now, because Warlocks can melee with Charisma, this is actually not too difficult to do. You could focus on Constitution, Charisma, and Wisdom, and sort of hybrid them if you want, or you could theoretically, prioritize like Charisma and just take, Wisdom spells that buff your characters and don't really need to have, high Wisdom in order to, land on enemies. So the highest Warlock I would probably go is 11 Warlock, 1 Cleric. Here you lose a feat from level 12 of Warlock, and in exchange you gain a Cleric subclass feature, which can be like better healing, or it can be weapon and armor proficiencies, or armor proficiencies. And you will also gain some Cleric level 1 spells and spell slots. So That's probably the highest I would go, mostly for those proficiencies if you really want those on your Warlock, but also because, you know, you might get a decent, like, Cleric subclass feature, like War Domain, for instance, would allow you to attack a couple extra times or a few extra times in between long rest. And then if you go to 10 Warlock, 2 Cleric, you lose your level 6 spell, Mystic Arcanum. You lose an additional spell slot because you'd have 3 at level 11 Warlock, and you lose an Eldritch Invocation. In exchange, you gain Channel Divinity, Turn Undead. I don't think it's worth it, in my opinion. I think you'd be better off going 11 Warlock, 1 Cleric, if that's what you really want to do, rather than going 10 Warlock, 2 Cleric. And then at 9 Warlock, 3 Cleric, you're losing a subclass feature of Warlock. In exchange, you're gaining Cleric level 2 spells and spell slots. I think that's a better trade, in my opinion. Warlock subclass features don't typically tend to be that strong. Like, there is, you know, some cases where they can be really good, but I think it's probably a better trade-off. And then at 8 Warlock, 4 Cleric, you're losing level 5 spells and spell slots, as well as an Eldritch Invocation in order to gain a feat. Again, I don't think that's a good spot to be. I wouldn't recommend going 8 Warlock, 4 Cleric. And at 7 Warlock, 5 Cleric, you're losing that third feat again in order to gain Cleric level 3 spells and spell slots and gain Destroy Undead. This is probably worth it, in my opinion, depending on what feats you need for this build, but I would definitely recommend this one over 8 and 4. And then at 6 Warlock, 6 Cleric, you lose level 4 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation in order to gain a Cleric subclass feature and a Channel Divinity charge. And I think this is probably very situational, depending on the very specific build that you're putting together. I think generally 7 Warlock, 5 Cleric would be better, or even going 5 Warlock, 5 Cleric, 2 Fighter would be better than going 6 and 6 here, usually. And this brings us to Warlock Druid Multiclassing. And this is another tough one because Druids like Clerics use Wisdom for their spell casting, or Warlocks use Charisma. So if you're casting hostile spells that are Druid spells, it's going to use your Wisdom, but you need some Charisma and you need some Wisdom. You could, again, put points into both of these and just pump Constitution, because Warlocks can melee with Charisma, or they could just be a proper spellcaster and just spellcast from range. So it's not that hard to do, but Druids don't multi-class as well as some other classes in this game, because typically they just gain a lot of their strength from putting more points into Druid. So this might be a little bit more difficult than Cleric. And the highest I would go here is 10 Warlock, 2 Druid, and by doing this, you're going to lose your feat from level 12 of Warlock. You're going to lose Mystic Arcanum, which is your level 6 spell, and you're going to lose Eldritch Invocation, but you will gain Druid spells and spell slots for level 1. You'll gain a Druid subclass feature, and you will also gain Wild Shape by doing this. I don't think I would go 11 Warlock and 1 Druid, because you don't get that subclass feature from Druid at that level, and you're simply just gaining some spell slots, really, which I don't think is worth it. And then at 9 Warlock, 3 Druid, you're losing a Warlock subclass feature in order to gain Druid level 2 spells and spell slots. You'll gain a natural recovery charge if you went Circle of the Land, and you'll gain some Circle of the Land spells to choose from also if you went Circle of the Land. And I think probably if you're playing predominantly a Warlock and with a few levels in Druid, you're not likely to go Circle of the Moon. Circle of the Moon is a very, class that's very difficult to multi-class, because it gets stronger and stronger the more that you take levels in Circle of Moon. And also because you can't use a lot of features while you're Wild Shape. So when you're playing as a Warlock Druid or predominantly Warlock, you're probably not going to Wild Shape. So therefore, Circle of the Moon probably doesn't make a good pairing, because that focuses a lot on Wild Shape. So I think you would probably take Circle of the Land or Circle of the Spores, but I think it makes more sense if you're going to go Circle of the Spores to take at least 6 levels in Druid. So I think, between 9 and 3, 8 and 4, 7 and 5, you're probably talking exclusively about playing a Circle of the Land Druid with Warlock. And then at 8 Warlock, 4 Druid, you lose level 5 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation, gain a feat, a Druid cantrip, and a Wild Shape form. Again, you're not really going to be Wild Shaping if you're playing predominantly as a Warlock. So I don't think this is a good spot to break here. I think I would probably go down 7 Warlock, 5 Druid if I was going to go this far, or go back up to 9 Warlock, 3 Druid. And then at 7 Warlock, 5 Druid, you lose that feat, but you gain Druid level 3 spells and spell slots. You gain another natural recovery charge, so you can recover more spell slots, and you gain some more Circle of the Land spells. And there is a lot of good selection of spells you can gain at level 3 spell slots, and Circle of the Land spells particularly. So I think this is a really nice spot for Warlock Druid. Now, if you want to go 6 Warlock, 6 Druid, I recommend going Circle of Spores here. You would lose level 4 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation, but you gain Fungal Infestation, and that's probably a big part of playing a Spores Druid, in my opinion. Additionally, Symbiotic Entity gets stronger the more levels in Druid that you have, so you need to put some significant levels into Druid in order to make, symbiotic entity worth it. So probably at least 6 levels would give you 24 extra temporary hit points, which is a decent amount in my opinion, and it uses wild shape charges that you wouldn't be using anyway, since you're not typically going to wild shape if you're playing predominantly a Warlock Druid. Now, again, if you are going to play a Warlock Druid, you could go 5 Warlock, 7 Druid in order to keep the 2 attacks from Warlock, and you would lose a Warlock subclass feature, but then you would also pick up level 4 spells and spell slots from Druid. You'd gain another natural recovery charge, and some more Circle of Land spells if you went Circle of Land. So if you're playing a Circle of Land Druid, I think 5 Warlock, 7 Druid is better than, 7 Warlock, 5 Druid, but you could go that way if you want. And keep in mind, too, this is another good pairing where you could go 5 Warlock, 5 Druid, and 2 Fighter in order to pick up Action Surge, and in order to get, like, Second Wind and some armor proficiencies. And also, if you're playing, like, if you do pick up those 2 levels of Fighter, when you respec, consider taking that level of Fighter first in order to gain Constitution saving throw proficiency for any, concentration spell checks you might make. Same with Barbarian, by the way. Okay, moving on to Warlock Fighter. This is a really good pairing, in my opinion. There's a lot to love here. Extra attack from Fighter stacks with Warlock. You can get a lot of proficiencies or an extra feat. And there's just a lot of really good things here, in my opinion. And I would recommend that if you are going to go Fighter Warlock, that you take 1 level of Fighter at least before you go the other levels in Warlock in order to gain Constitution saving throw proficiency, which will help with your concentration saving throw checks if you're using concentration spells as a Warlock. So the highest I would probably go would be 11 Warlock, 1 Fighter, and what happens here is you lose your 3rd feat from level 12 of Warlock and your final Eldritch Invocation, but you do gain weapon proficiencies, armor proficiencies. If you took Fighter first, you would also gain Constitution saving throw proficiencies, good for concentration checks, as I mentioned. You would gain a fighting style and Second Wind. That's a pretty good trade, in my opinion, generally. I think, you could justify a feat to gain all those things easily. And then if you go down to 2 Warlock, 2 Fighter, you're essentially losing your level 6 spell. You're losing your 3rd Warlock spell slot, which is rough, and you're losing an Eldritch Invocation to gain Action Surge. I don't know if that's a great trade, in my opinion. You do have 2 attacks if you go Pact of the Blade with your melee attack, so you could use Action Surge quite effectively, but that's a lot to give up. I think this is like a really gray area, and I could see it going either way. And then if you go to 9 Warlock, 3 Fighter, you're essentially sacrificing your Warlock subclass feature at level 10 to gain your first Fighter subclass feature, and Fighter subclass features are very front-loaded, so I think this is a good trade. I think 9 Warlock, 3 Fighter is better than 10 Warlock, 2 Fighter, for instance. And then at 8 Warlock, 4 Fighter, you lose level 5 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation on your Warlock in order to gain a feat. I don't think this is a good trade, in my opinion. I would recommend either going 9 and 3 or going down to 7 and 5. And then at 7 Warlock, 5 Fighter, you're losing that feat you would have gained at 8 Warlock, 4 Fighter, but you gain extra attack. This is huge, in my opinion, because Warlocks have an extra attack that stacks with Fighter's extra attack. This is 3 attacks every turn. Extremely, extremely powerful. And, if you're not going, 9 and 3 or 10 and 2 or something like that, you definitely want to go down to 7 and 5 to pick that up. And then at 6 Warlock, 6 Fighter, you're losing level 4 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation in order to gain a feat. I don't know if that's a good trade or not. Depends on what you really need for your feats. I think 7 and 5 is a better spot, but there is another option here, which is you could go like 5 Warlock, 5 Fighter, and then like 2 Paladin or 2 Sorcerer or 2 Wizard or 2 Bard or something here instead. And I'll explain why that might be. And the reason for that is when you go down from 6 Warlock to 5 Warlock, you're basically just losing a Warlock subclass feature, and you've already lost your level 4 spells and spell slots from going down from 7 and 5 to 6 and 6. So going down to 5 is really not that big a deal, in my opinion. And what you would really have to gauge here is whether that extra feat from Fighter is worth something like if you went 2 Paladin, for instance, you could pick up Divine Smite, and it might not seem that great, like a couple of Warlock spell slots is 2 Divine Smites. But you would gain some spell slots from Paladin, and if you went Eldritch Knight on Fighter, you would gain even more spell slots you could use Divine Smites with. And if you went Sorcerer, you could gain some more spell slots, you could gain some more spells to have access to. Their spell scale with Charisma, so does Warlock, so there's some nice synergy there. If you took 2 levels of Wizard, for instance, you could pick up some more spell slots, and if you went Eldritch Knight on your Fighter, and had decent intelligence with maybe like, the crown that gives you intelligence, that could work also really well, and you could also learn spells from scrolls, so that's not a bad pickup. Wizards typically have really good benefits at level 2. And if you went 2 levels of Bard, same thing as Sorcerer, you get some more spell slots, you gain some more spells. Bard spell scale with Charisma, you could pick up Bardic Inspiration and Song of Rest. Song of Rest works really well with a Warlock because their spell slots replenish on short rest. So So having an extra short rest would not be bad. All those would be very viable options. So next we're going to take a look at Warlock Monk multiclassing, and there's not a lot of synergy between these classes at first glance because monks are predominantly melee classes. So you basically have to play a Pact of the Blade Warlock in order to take advantage of monk because of the way Flurry of Blows and unarmed attacks work. You have to be in melee range to use those. So kind of like Fighter, if you're playing a Warlock Monk multiclass, you would pretty much have to play some sort of melee Warlock. Additionally, monks gain some bonuses from Wisdom to their armor class if they're unarmored, and they also use their Way of the Four Elements spells. A lot of them use Wisdom for their difficulty class checks. So I wouldn't recommend going Way of the Four Elements monk if you're playing with Warlock, just because you're probably going to focus predominantly on Charisma, Constitution, and probably Dexterity, since monks have a huge focus on that, and you really won't have points for Wisdom. So if you take a look at 11 Warlock, 1 Monk, which is the highest I think you might go, you're essentially trading your feat and an Eldritch Invocation to gain Ki, to gain Flurry of Blows, Unarmored Defense with Wisdom, which probably won't benefit this build, and like Martial Arts, which is like increased unarmed attack damage, and also, you know, being able to use weapons with Dexterity instead of Strength. Because you're probably playing a Pact of the Blade Warlock, that's not super relevant either. So really what you're gaining is a couple of key points in Flurry of Blows. Not sure that's a great trade to lose a third feat and an Eldritch Invocation for. Now, if you go to 10 Warlock and 2 Monk, you lose a level 6 spell, you lose your third spell slot for Warlock, you lose an Eldritch Invocation, you gain unarmored movement, increasing your movement speed if you're not wearing armor, you gain Patient Defense and Step of the Wind, which are nice uses of Ki. Admittedly, you won't have much Ki at this level, you'd have like 3 Ki, so you wouldn't get a ton of uses out of those. So I think this is probably not a good breakpoint in my opinion. You could do it, but I don't think it's the best place. And then if you go down to 9 Warlock and 3 Monk, you're basically saying I'm going to sacrifice my Warlock subclass feature in order to pick up a Monk subclass and Deflect Missiles. Deflect Missiles is a great reaction in this game, allowing monks to, you know, negate damage from ranged attacks and also sometimes fling them back at enemies if they have high dexterity. So you definitely want some dexterity probably if you're playing this build. But also, you know, Monk subclass features you'll pick up are probably better than the ones you gain from Warlock. So I think 9 and 3 is probably, you know, the highest I would go here. Like, you could go 11 and 1, 10 and 2, but I think 9 and 3 is probably where I would say, okay, this is actually worth going some levels a month. And then if you go 8 Warlock, 4 Monk, you lose level 5 spells and slots and an Eldritch Invocation to gain a feat and slow fall. I don't think this is a good trade. Much like Fighter, I think going 7 Warlock, 5 Monk is better because you're going to sacrifice that feat at 8 and 4, but you're going to gain extra attack. And in the case of Monks, you also gain Stunning Strike. So I think it's doubly better here than it would be for Fighter at 7 and 5. Because again, extra attack will stack with Warlocks, allowing you to have 3 attacks. And then because you can use Stunning Strike, you have the chance to stun the enemy you're fighting multiple times or stun multiple enemies, preventing them from taking turns, which is really great. And then if you go down to 6 Warlock, 6 Monk, you lose level 4 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation, but you gain some Monk subclass features. You gain improved unarmored movement, so if you're not wearing armor, you'll be able to move further, and you also gain Key Empowered Strikes, which helps them overcome resistances to bludgeoning damage. And this is definitely a spot where you might consider, in my opinion, because monks have some great stuff at subclass level 6, particularly if you're playing Way of the Open Hand, you're getting extra unarmed damage. Now, obviously, you still have to attack with a weapon with this build because of the way packed weapons work with Warlock, so you might not get as much as out of Way of the Open Hand here. But Way of Shadow is really good here too, getting Shadow Step at level 6, being able to use your bonus action to get into melee range, and then your next attack has advantage. Be really good for a melee Warlock, so I think there's definitely a case for going 6 Monk here. Now, I would say, though, that what you get from level 6 Warlock is a subclass feature that's sometimes not that great, so you could go 5 Warlock, 6 Monk, and like 1 Fighter in order to gain a fighting style and some proficiencies. And again, if you took that level of Fighter first, they have Constitution saving throw proficiency for concentration spells, which is nice. Or you could go 5 Warlock, 5 Monk, and 2 Fighter, and not pick up those extra Monk subclass features, but then gain those things, plus an Action Surge from Fighter, which would be really nice because you'd be able to attack 3 times, Action Surge, and then 3 times again. And keep in mind that you could use Stunning Strike on just about all of those attacks, which could be phenomenal. So next we have Paladin Warlock Multiclassing, and this is probably one of the best multiclasses a Warlock could have, if not the best. It's really, really strong in my opinion. You can just gain a lot of things from Paladin that stack really well with Warlock, and again, Paladins use Charisma for their spellcasting, just like Warlock, so there's some nice synergy there. Paladins have extra attack that stacks with the extra attack of Warlock, so there's some great things being able to use your Warlock spell slots for Divine Smites and then getting them back on short rest. A lot of really nice things that you gain from Warlock Paladin. So if you're talking about how high you would go for Warlock Paladin, I think the highest you would go is 10 Warlock, 2 Paladin. You really don't gain much at one level of Paladin, in my opinion. I think most classes are minimally, when they multi-class with Paladin, going to take at least 2 levels in order to gain Divine Smite and a fighting style. And it's the same here with Warlock. You're essentially saying that if you are going 10 Warlock, 2 Paladin, sacrificing your 3rd feat, a level 6 spell, your 3rd Warlock spell slot, and 2 Eldritch Invocations to gain Paladin spells and spell slots, Divine Smite, a fighting style, and proficiencies. Like, you can gain weapon proficiencies and armor proficiencies, shield proficiency, etc. So there are a lot of good things here. You sacrifice a lot from your Warlock to gain this from Paladin. So I'm not sure 10-2 is optimal, but you do gain a lot from Paladin at level 2, and I don't think you're going to gain hardly anything at level 1 Paladin. Now at level 9 Warlock and 3 Paladin, you lose your Warlock subclass feature from level 10, and you gain Divine Health and a Paladin spell slot. I don't think that's worth it, in my opinion. I would probably stay 10 and 2 rather than go 9 and 3. Now, if you go 8 Warlock, 4 Paladin, you lose level 5 spells and slots from your Warlock and an Eldritch Invocation to gain a feat. I'm not sure that's worth it, in my opinion. It really depends on what feats you need. Could be a good trade here, depending on what you need from Paladin, but I'm not so sure. And then at 7 Warlock, 5 Paladin, you lose that 3rd feat, but you gain extra attack from Paladin, and you gain Paladin level 2 spells and slots. You basically go from 3 level 1 Paladin slots to 4 level 1 Paladin slots and 2 level 2 slots. Really good for Divine Smite, plus the extra attack that stacks with Warlock. If you're going to go Warlock Paladin, I would minimally go 7 Warlock, 5 Paladin. I think this is probably the sweet spot here in terms of if you're just talking like only Warlock Paladin multi-class. Definitely 7 Warlock, 5 Paladin is a really good spot. And if you go 6 Warlock, 6 Paladin, you're sacrificing your level 4 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation to gain Aura of Protection. Aura of Protection increases your saving throws by your Charisma modifier, since it should be high, because Pact of the Blade will make it so your melee attack scale off Charisma. You can just pump Charisma here. That's a really good pickup to get, and this buffs, nearby allies as well. So there is a case for going 6 Warlock, 6 Paladin, and if you've gone 7 Warlock, 5 Paladin, you could definitely consider going 6 Warlock, 5 Paladin as well. And another thing I want to mention too is that even though I think 6 Paladin is really good, 6 Warlock, again, not so great for, the subclass feature you get here typically. So you could go 5 Warlock, 6 Paladin, 1 Fighter in order to gain another fighting style and second wind. Or you could go 5 Warlock, 5 Paladin, and 2 Fighter to gain Action Surge. That would allow you to do 3 attacks. Action Surge, do 3 attacks again. This is a pretty meta setup. So if, those are also possibilities that you should definitely consider. And again, if you do add a level of Fighter here, it's best to take that Fighter level first in order to have Constitution saving throw proficiency, which helps with concentration checks. So next we're going to take a look at Warlock Ranger multiclassing, and this is another one where, Wisdom is a spellcasting ability modifier of Ranger, and Charisma is that of Warlock, so they don't seem to synergize well at first glance, but they actually do pair together rather well, in my opinion, mostly because of the extra attack that Ranger gets at level 5 that stacks with Warlocks, so that's still really good. They do get a fighting style, just like Paladins and Fighters do, although they have different fighting styles than Paladins. So there are some good synergies here, and, even though it might not look like it immediately, you can still play this multi-class fairly well. So the highest I think you might go for Warlock is 11 Warlock, 1 Ranger here, and what you're doing by, dipping 1 level into Rangers, you're saying, okay, I'm going to sacrifice a feat and my final Eldritch Invocation to gain a skill and a favorite enemy and Natural Explorer. These are typically skills, but can sometimes be damage resistance or other things. So you could get potentially 3 skills for a feat, and an Eldritch Invocation. Depending on, how your party's set up and whether you really need those skills, this could be a good trade. Otherwise, if you don't need skills, it's really not. If you go 10 Warlock, 2 Ranger, you're essentially losing your level 6 spell, you're losing an additional spell slot from Warlock, and you're losing an Eldritch Invocation to gain level 1 Ranger spells and slots and a fighting style. I don't think it's a good trade, in my opinion. If you're going to go Warlock Ranger, I think you should go more levels into Ranger, otherwise I don't think it's worth it. At 9 Warlock, 3 Ranger, you're sacrificing your subclass feature from Warlock to gain a subclass feature from Ranger. This is a better place to be than 10 and 2, in my opinion. There's some great Ranger subclass features at level 3. Ranger typically pretty front-loaded. You wouldn't go Beastmaster here, because again, Beastmaster is one of those classes where you really need to go a lot of levels in Beastmaster. So you would probably go Hunter here or Gloomstalker in order to pick up the things they get at level 3, which could be really strong. Dread Ambusher is really good, giving you an extra attack on the first round, which would allow you to attack 3 times on the first round with some extra damage, or getting like Colossus Slayer for extra damage every round. if you went Hunter. If you go 8 Warlock, 4 Ranger, you're losing level 5 spells and slots from Warlock and an Eldritch Invocation to gain a feat. Again, I don't think this is a good trade. I think you're much better off if you're, going this far into Ranger to go 7 Warlock, 5 Ranger. You wouldn't have that feat, but then you do gain extra attack from the Ranger, which stacks with Warlock, giving you 3 attacks every turn. Plus, you'd have level 2 spells and spell slots from Ranger, which is nice. Now, if you go 6 Warlock, 6 Ranger, you're sacrificing your level 4 spells and slots from Warlock and an Eldritch Invocation to gain a favored enemy Natural Explorer. This is not worth it, in my opinion. I would not go 6 Warlock and 6 Ranger just for this. I think that's a bad trade. And just like some of the other Warlock multiclassing here, I think another really good option here would be 5 Warlock, 5 Ranger, 2 Fighter to get Action Surge and another fighting style, plus some proficiencies, including Constitution saving throw proficiency, if you take 1 level of Fighter first. But what can be really nasty here is if you went Gloomstalker, you could essentially get 4 attacks on your first turn, Action Surge, and then get 3 attacks. So you could have 7 attacks in 1 turn by going with this pairing, and that first attack will obviously deal a little extra damage. That's pretty freaking deadly in my opinion, so consider doing that as well. So next we take a look at Rogue Warlock multiclassing, and I don't think there is a ton of synergy between Rogue and Warlock in this game, mostly because Arcane Trickster spell slots wouldn't combine with Warlock, but there are some things that you do gain from Rogue, and we'll take a look at what you do get. So first, let's take a look at 11 Warlock, 1 Rogue, and by taking this, essentially you're ditching your 3rd feat and an Eldritch Invocation to gain a skill, some expertise, and a 1d6 sneak attack die. And I think there is a case for this, in my opinion. If you want expertise and dialogue options, for instance, from the very beginning of the game, and maybe you're the face of the party because you have high charisma and you have proficiency in, persuasion or deception or something, this is not a bad pickup to gain expertise really quickly and to, make sure you ace all your dialogue checks. Now, if you drop down to 10 Warlock, 2 Rogue, you're essentially sacrificing your level 6 spell, your 3rd Warlock spell slot, and Eldritch Invocation to gain Cunning Action, Disengage, Dash, and Hide. And I don't think this is a great trade in my opinion. Even though Cunning Action is really strong in this game as a bonus action, what you're giving up to get it, I don't think I would do. Now, at 9 Warlock, 3 Rogue, you're sacrificing your last Warlock subclass feature in order to gain a Rogue subclass and to increase the sneak attack damage of Rogue from 1d6 to 2d6. And I think this is probably the sweet spot for Warlock Rogue, in my opinion, if you're just talking a dual multi-class, because if you're going to go 10 Warlock, 2 Rogue, you might as well go down 1 more to get the Rogue subclass features. Rogues are extremely front-loaded. They gain most of their good benefits, like 80% of them, at level 3 in most of the cases. Unless you're like an Arcane Trickster or something that's just gaining spell slots as you level up in it. But, Thief gains a bonus action at level 3, which is great. Assassin gains its benefits at level 3. So I think if I was going to go Warlock Rogue, this would be the spot where I would probably stop unless I was going some, 3 multi-class build. If you go 8 Warlock and 4 Rogue, you're losing level 5 spells and spell slots and an Eldritch Invocation to gain a feat. This could be a good spot if you don't need level 5 spells and slots. Depending, Rogue Warlock doesn't have the greatest synergy, so you might need some feats in order to make it a lot stronger. So I think in this case, there is a case for 8 Warlock, 4 Rogue. Really depends on what the feats you need are. And then if you go 7 Warlock, 5 Rogue, you're losing that feat you would have just had at 8 Warlock, 4 Rogue to gain Uncanny Dodge, which reduces the damage you take by half if an attack connects with you, and you gain an extra 1d6 sneak attack die. This is a pretty good trade for a feat, in my opinion. If you're going to go 8 and 4 Rogue, 7 and 5 Rogue is definitely worth considering, depending on what you need with that feat and how often you're actually pulling off sneak attack with this setup. Now, if you go 6 Warlock and 6 Rogue, you lose level 4 spells and slots and Eldritch Invocation to gain expertise and 2 skills. I'm not sure that's worth it. The expertise you probably want with this build is probably with your dialogue options, which you would have got from 1 level of Rogue anyway, so I don't think I would go down that far at all. But there are a lot of, triple multi-class builds you could do with this by going 5 Warlock, 5 Rogue, 2 Fighter to gain Action Surge, some proficiencies, a fighting style, or 2 Paladin, pick up Divine Smite and a fighting style and some proficiencies, particularly if you went Arcane Trickster and had more spell slots that you could use Divine Smites with. You could also go Sorcerer here to pick up more spell slots, again, if you went Arcane Trickster. A lot of the same things that apply to Fighter here with 5 Fighter, 5 Warlock, a lot of the good multi-classing pairings would also work here. 2 Bard would work, for instance, or even 2 Wizard. So there's a lot of 5, 5, and 2s that you could do here that would work really well as well. Moving to Sorcerer Warlock multiclassing, this is another really great pairing because, again, Sorcerers use Charisma for their spell casting just like Warlocks. If you crank Charisma, you can have effective spells from both classes. Additionally, by getting sorcery points from Sorcerer, you can make your spells more effective, including using Quicken Spell, allowing you to like attack twice with your Warlock, and then, use your bonus action to fling a spell. So the highest I'd probably go here is 11 Warlock, 1 Sorcerer. Here you would lose a feat and Eldritch Invocation to gain level 1 spells, spell slots, and a Sorcerer subclass. And you could take something like Storm Sorcery here to get Tempestuous Magic, which makes it so that when you cast a spell, a level 1 spell or higher, you can use your bonus action to like fly. That's not necessarily bad. It's not a bad pickup. You're not always casting spells every turn as a Warlock because you only have limited spell slots, but that would still keep your 3 spell slots as a Warlock, so that is an option. Now, if you go 10 Warlock, 2 Sorcerer, you're losing your level 6 spell, you're losing your 3rd Warlock spell slot, and an Eldritch Invocation to gain sorcery points, meta magic, and a spell slot. I'm not sure that's a great trade in my opinion. I think if you're going to go Sorcerer, you either just take 1 level to gain that, and you kind of play as a Warlock with a little bit of a boost, or you go more levels in Sorcerer. If you go 9 Warlock, 3 Sorcerer, you lose your subclass feature from Warlock, but you do gain level 2 spells and slots from Sorcerer, and you also gain access to more meta magic, including Quicken Spell, which is really, really strong. So I think 9 and 3 is definitely better than 10 and 2. Now, if you go 8 and 4, 8 Warlock, 4 Sorcerer, you lose level 5 spells and slots from Warlock and an Eldritch Invocation in order to gain a feat. I don't think you need this necessarily. You could take it if you're really feat hungry, but I don't think you're going to need to because you're going to be able to just pump Charisma pretty easily. Keep in mind, too, that if you take levels of Sorcerer first, you're going to have Constitution saving throw proficiency, which helps with concentration checks. So if you are playing a Warlock Sorcerer, probably take 1 level of Sorcerer first. And then if you go 7 Warlock, 5 Sorcerer, you lose that 3rd feat again, but you gain level 3 spells and spell slots from Sorcerer. There's a lot of really good level 3 spells and slots, so I think this is a good trade for the most part, particularly, if you're planning to play this predominantly as a caster. If you're not playing as much of a caster and you're trying to go some sort of like melee hybrid, then you might want that feat. And then at 6 Warlock, 6 Sorcerer, you lose level 4 spells and slots from Warlock and an Eldritch Invocation, but you gain a Sorcerer subclass feature. There's some really good ones at level 6, like Bend Luck, for instance. And Draconic Bloodline has some good ones that, impact particular elements. And also here you'd have 6 sorcery points, allowing you to use Quicken Spell twice between long rests. So I think that's, a really good sweet spot for Sorcerer to get. Now, I don't think you necessarily need 6 levels of Warlock here, so you could take 5 Warlock, 6 Sorcerer, 1 Fighter in order to gain like a fighting style, some proficiencies, and Second Wind, if you want to do that. And obviously, if you took Fighter first, you could have heavy armor proficiency, which would be nice. Or you could do 5 Warlock, 5 Sorcerer, and 2 Fighter in order to pick up Action Surge. You wouldn't gain that subclass feature from Sorcerer or the 6 sorcery points, but you would gain, Action Surge from Fighter, which would be quite nice as well. So lastly, we come to Wizard, Warlock, and this is a bit of a tricky one because, again, Wizards use Intelligence for their spellcasting while Warlocks use Charisma, so it doesn't synergize as well as with maybe like Sorcerer would. But you can learn spells from scrolls with Wizard, allowing you to gain a larger selection of spells, and because Wizards can sub out their spells at any time outside of combat, there is a little bit more flexibility with Wizard being in there than something like Sorcerer. So probably the highest I would go here is 10 Warlock, 2 Wizard, and what you're saying is you're going to lose your 3rd feat, you're going to lose your level 6 spell, you're going to lose a Warlock spell slot, and 2 Eldritch Invocations to gain a Wizard subclass feature, and some Wizard level 1 spells and spell slots and cantrips and Arcane Recovery. I'm not sure that's a great trade, in my opinion. I think you're probably losing more than you're gaining there, but you probably wouldn't go like 1 level of Wizard unless you just wanted to learn spells from scrolls. You could do that. Now, at 9 Warlock, 3 Wizard, you lose a subclass feature from Warlock, but you gain level 2 spells and slots, and you gain an Arcane Recovery charge. I think this is much better than 10 and 2, in my opinion. It gives you access to a much wider array of Wizard spells, and you do have level 2 spell slots, so you'll be able to cast Wizard level 2 spells. This is a better spot than 10 and 2. And then you come to 8 Warlock, 4 Wizard, and what you're saying is you're going to lose 5 level 5 spells and slots and an Eldritch Invocation from Warlock to gain a feat. A cantrip. You might need this depending on how you split your attributes and what sort of build you're going for. It's not necessarily ideal, but at the same time, I think there is a case for a feat here depending on, how you set this build up. And then at 7 Warlock, 5 Wizard, you lose that feat, but you gain level 3 spells and slots from Wizard, and you gain another Arcane Recovery charge. There are a lot of really powerful level 3 spells. This is probably better than 8 and 4 in my opinion. And, you're going to gain things like Fireball or Lightning Bolt here where you can shell out a lot of AoE damage. So it's a good level in my opinion. And then at 6 Warlock, 6 Wizard, you're losing level 4 spells and slots and an Eldritch Invocation from Warlock to gain a Wizard subclass feature. This is very situational. Wizards do have some good subclass features at level 6 depending on the subclass that you chose, but I don't know if it's worth losing out on level 4 spells and level 4 spell slots of Warlock. So you really have a tough choice here. It could go either way depending on how your build is set up. And just like other Warlock multiclassing, I think there's a good case here to go like 5 Warlock, 6 Wizard, and like 1 Fighter if you want some proficiencies. Like if you take Fighter first, again, Constitution saving throw proficiencies, you get heavy armor, something like that would be great. Or you could go 5 Warlock, 5 Wizard, and 2 Fighter in order to pick up Action Surge, as I mentioned before, which is really strong if you went Pack of the Blade on Warlock. So that wraps up our video on Warlock multiclassing. Warlocks are hands down one of the best multiclasses in Baldur's Gate 3. Simply because their extra attack from Pack of the Blade stacks with the extra attack of martial classes, allowing you to get 3 attacks on a lot of builds, and still have a couple extra levels, to take something else if you want. You can go 5/5 and then 2 of something else. Really, really strong pairing. And if you're playing a Warlock or you want to play a multi-class build in this game, consider multi-class with Warlock. It's really, really good. As always, if you have further tips or questions, leave them in the comments. If there's something I missed, leave them there. And we will continue with this series. We're also going to do some more Baldur's Gate 3 videos. I think we're going to be exploring the spells a little bit. I know probably a lot of people are not familiar with what all the spells in the game do, so we're going to go through some of them, maybe some of the best ones, and pick out and show you guys just exactly why they're so good.